welcome back to the Bantz. As always, I am your host, the Bantz, and here we are at the beginning of the week once again, this time on a Tuesday. So of course it is time for our first what's happening in fashion for the week, so let's just get right into it. And first up, of course, we have our headlines for the day. And in our first headline, let's talk about the newest XLarge collaboration, this time between the Simpsons, just because I want to talk about it a little bit. So there's really two major things I want to cover in this story, so to speak. The first of which being, of course, just this onslaught of Simpsons collaborations that we've seen recently. I mean, Atmos, XLarge here, Club 75, just to name a few. I know there has been a couple others. I'm really not enjoying it, mainly because I'm really hating that this is becoming a trend, this idea of taking one well-known brand, be it a movie, comic, whatever, and just totally just pounding it to death across collaborations. I mean, first off, we saw it with the Peanuts, which, I mean, in all honesty, the Peanuts collaborations are still going on to this day. And then we saw Dragon Ball, and now we see this here with the Simpsons, and I am really not liking this becoming a thing. But my second, and probably in my opinion more important thing that I wanted to talk about is just kind of the lack of enthusiasm from XLarge in all these collaborations. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's very cool that we're finally seeing XLarge get some more press, some more hype than they have in God knows how many years. And I do think it is really cool that they are getting as many collaborations as they are. I mean, once again, the Simpsons collaboration, plus we also saw a Dragon Ball collaboration, go figure, a Naruto collaboration, and even another couple collaborations that I can't think of off the top of my head just in recent weeks. But even so, what that's ended up leading to here with XLarge is a quantity over quality problem. Especially when you're dealing with this many different designs, this many different collaborations, it can get really stressful, really hectic, and you end up pumping out just some really lazy and some really bad designs overall. And honestly, I think that's exactly what happened here with XLarge. So I guess what you might be wondering is, what am I trying to get at by saying all of this? Well, in both cases, the just excessive amount of Simpsons collaborations and just the excessive amount of XLarge collaborations, when it all comes down to it, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. There's really no better way to absolutely kill any hype for your brand than by watering it down, by showing it over and over and over again in such a small span of time. But once again, that is just my opinion. If you guys have a differing opinion or have thought of something that I might have overlooked, then feel free to let me know. I'd love to know what you guys think about all this. Then, in probably our most interesting story of the day, let's talk about the new streetwear brand, Original Use. Now, if you haven't heard of Original Use, that's totally fine. It is in fact a brand new brand. But even more so than that, the probably most odd thing about it is that this is Target's attempt at a streetwear brand. Yes, I am talking about Target, the big red bullseye. They're trying to make a streetwear brand. Now, for all of you that might be up in arms about hearing this, and probably expect me to be up in arms about it too, you'd actually be quite surprised. You see, for those of you who may not remember, or possibly too young to remember, there was a time a couple years ago, I want to say maybe like 5-6 years ago, where there was this big trend in fast fashion companies and just big box store companies in general collaborating with a bunch of different fashion designers. Uniqlo had their share of collaborations, H&M had a shit ton of collaborations, and most importantly, especially for this story, Target also had their share of collaborations as well. The most memorable ones to me being probably the Missoni and Phillip Lim ones, but there were a handful of others as well. And the thing about these collaborations is they actually weren't that bad. Yes, the majority of them were mainly pointed toward women's wear. I mean, the Missoni was all women's wear, the Alexander McQueen was all women's wear, the majority of them were all women's wear. But the Philip Lim one, for example, actually did have a couple menswear pieces, and I actually thought they were pretty good. I wasn't able to get any because they sold out almost instantly, but if I had had the chance, I probably would have picked up one or two. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is not the first time that Target has done something a little bit more high-end, a little bit more designer-ish. But with that said, is it streetwear? Absolutely fucking not. As far as streetwear goes, in my mind at least, it's not so much about what the product is as it is about the story or the people or the designs behind it. And when it comes down to it, a big company such as Target doesn't make streetwear, they just make streetwear inspired designs. But now with all that out of the way, let's move on to the actual product itself, and it's actually not terrible. There is a huge selection of products in a very wide variety of styles, and when it comes down to the essence of streetwear designs, that being mainly the graphics on some of the tees and other pieces here, they're actually not that bad compared to what you see in a lot of t-shirt lines nowadays, although that's not really saying much, seeing as how absolutely fucking awful most t-shirt lines nowadays are. And when you look into some of the more interesting pieces in this collection, such as the, and yes, this is real, the reversible bomber kimono jackets, I'm actually fairly surprised that Target was able to pull something like this off. However, seeing how everything is priced in this collection, including that bomber jacket I just talked about, being between $10 and $40 at the top, yes, that reversible kimono jacket is only $40. Really leaves me suspect as to how nice the conditions are behind the manufacturing of these pieces, as well as just the quality of the pieces themselves. If I had to take a guess, probably not that good. So now with all that said, the question is now off to you. Do you love the idea? Do you hate the idea? Do you give Target at least some kudos for attempting to do something like this? Or is it more just a sad excuse at trying to push more fast fashion out into the market? Either way, I'd love to know what you guys think about all this. Alright, and now let's move on to our art stories for the day. And first up, LA Bryson showed off some of her newest portraits, and I think these are just incredible. I love the different use of brush strokes here, as well as the elements and textures as well. And if any of that sounds interesting to you, I'd definitely check out more of these. Then Debbie Lawson showed off some of her newest magical rug sculptures, and these are just super interesting. I think the just creativity it took into taking two very different mediums of art, in this case pattern rugs and sculptures, and combining them into this very kind of artistic hybrid was just super cool. And if this looks interesting to you, I would definitely take a look into this as well. And lastly, Yosuke Ueno showed off some of his newest works, and these are just very nice as well, going along with some more of the surrealism we've seen in the last couple videos, although much more on the animated style with a little sprinkling of an Eastern style in there as well. If any of this looks interesting to you, then I'd definitely check this out too. Okay, and now moving back into our fashion section for the day. First up, Levi's Vintage Collection showed off their Fall Winter 2018 lookbook, and I think they did just a fantastic job with it. For a brand that really likes to stick more to that Western look, that Americana look, that heritage from the earlier part of the 20th century, here we see them in this lookbook shake things up a lot and instead take inspirations from not only Jamaica but from the 1970s as well. And I really do think that this fresh new take on things really makes for a hell of a collection. Aside from the standard silhouettes and pieces you'd see during this decade, we see a hell of a lot more color than I've ever seen LVC use before, and honestly, they just nailed it. Whether it be in a solid colored piece, a patterned piece, or even in some cases a patchworked piece, they've just taken all of this essence, all of this color out of the 70s and just made it so much more detailed for today's standards. And of course, it wouldn't be a Levi's collection without at least some denim, and there is plenty of it here. And honestly, I all think they incorporate very well into the style they were going for, and they did make sure that some of the pieces here, even though just denim, have some aesthetic, some detailing to them to make them stand out and feel more maximalized for what this decade brought to us. So overall, a fantastic showing here by LVC, and if you are a fan of denim or of maximalism, or maybe you've just been wanting to introduce some more color to your palette in general, then definitely give this collection a look. And lastly, Japanese brand Poliquant showed off their spring summer 2019 lookbook, and it was pretty interesting overall. Starting off with the streetwear pieces, I feel like the designs here are very solid, exactly what you'd expect out of a Japanese streetwear brand. And when it comes to the graphics, I think the designs here are just super clean and super original and really refreshing compared to some of the other graphics we see on the market nowadays. Then when you start adding in some of the contemporary elements, such as these larger pieces and these layering aspects and some of the all over patterns they bring along as well, you start getting these very unique outfits. And although I wouldn't say all of them work, because definitely some of these contemporary pieces are meant to just be one-offs, I still think when it comes to more of the layering aspects, I think they still work fairly well, especially when you take into the fact that this is definitely much more of a Japanese style. And although the tech elements can feel a little bit overkill on some of these pieces, especially when matched with some of those much more maximalized all over prints, I don't think they kill any pieces necessarily, and I think when it comes down to it, they're fairly interesting, and who can't appreciate a little bit more interesting clothing nowadays? So if you have been looking for some more interesting pieces of streetwear to add to your collection, or maybe just some nice layering or one-off pieces, definitely check out this lookbook. You will not be disappointed. And finally, let's move on to our articles for the day. And first up, Haider sat down with graphic designer Mirko Borsche to talk about some of the more recent work he's done as far as the rebranding for not only Haider themselves, but also Givenchy and Balenciaga, among others. So if you're much more interested in kind of the typography or graphic design behind some brands, or maybe just want to hear him talk about it, definitely give this a read. Then Heddles did a very nice and very in-depth article into helping you buy vintage ball caps, going over a majority, I wouldn't say all, but the bulk of the brands out there doing vintage ball caps, talking about their styles, their designs, how they're made, how they look, and so on. So if you've been looking for hats in this market, I would definitely read this for sure. And lastly, GQ sat down with designer Haider Ackermann to talk a little bit about his history, his abrupt departure from Berluti, what he's doing now, and what he has in store for the future. Always a very interesting read and always nice to hear from him. So if you want to learn a little bit more about him and what he's doing now, I definitely read this as well. Alright guys, and with that we reach the end of our first Whif for the week. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and as always, if you want to read any of the articles I talked about today or see any photos I wasn't able to include, I've linked everything in the description down below. And if you are new here, then welcome to the channel. We do these What's Happening in Fashion videos twice a week, usually on Tuesdays and Fridays. So if you're interested in seeing more, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, always, if you just have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to talk about fashion in general, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I am always willing to talk fashion. And once again, guys, thank you so much for watching these videos and supporting my content. I hope you all have a great week ahead of you until I see you next, and as always, until next time.